let's start with this. No tax on tips. Now, as a proposal itself, it has a pretty small impact. It actually has much more of a, I would say, a popular impact. Like it's easy to communicate in pop culture. Many people have worked in a tipped job, so they kind of understand this. Certainly, if you've worked in a tipped job before and you follow the rules, you know what it's like to get a tip and actually have to log it in the system, make sure that it goes through the payroll, that the employer can withhold whatever they need to withhold, record it. People kind of get that. The reality is this is per the stuff that I could Google, let's say. My quick Google search says there's only 4 million people who are actually tipped workers in this country. I think an important thing to do also is to make sure that we define what a tip is, at least per the IRS. Okay. A tip is a discretionary, which means optional or extra, discretionary payment determined by a customer that employees receive from that customer. It's distinct from wages or a bonus. So if you've ever worked in a tipped job, you would actually see a box for tipped wages on your W-2. These are distinct line items. So the plumbing is in place, per se, to be able to exempt this from income tax. The problem with this, and the problem with exempting overtime from income tax, is that it's very easily gamified, if you will. So a big reason that there is a lot of support for something like this actually has nothing to do with even the tipped workers, though it's a larger number of people. It has to do with the fact that your employers, when they record your tip payments, have to pay payroll tax. They have to pay payroll tax on all of your tips. So, very simple illustration, right? If you get a $10 tip and you actually record that, your employer, despite having not paid you any of that money, is literally going to pay, depending on where you are, 7 or 8, I guess in $10, 70 or 80 cents of payroll tax. Actually, probably closer to $1 of payroll tax, just because you got tipped. So there's a lot of restaurant owners or other facilities where they actually employ tipped workers who are in favor of that, because that's literally just a tax that has nothing to do with their business, has nothing to do with them selling more product. It's literally a customer tipping an employee creates a tax for the business owner. So they're big fans of it. The reason I think this is plausible is that there's only 4 million people who are tipped workers in the United States. That is way less than the number of people who are taking Social Security. Like he's talked about making Social Security tax free, and I think that's also plausible. But there's 70 million people who are on Social Security right now taking Social Security benefits today. 70 million. We're talking about 4 million tipped workers in the United States. It is a fraction of the number of people. If you were to look at wages, the average tipped worker is making about $32,000 a year. That's just over $15 all in. So when you think about this, if I was to just run very simple math, if somebody's making $32,000, they get a standard deduction of, call it 12 to keep the math easy. That gives you $20,000 of taxable income as a single person. That's something like $2,200 of tax that they would have paid that they otherwise don't have to, because of potentially tax-free tips. Now, there's going to be ways that this is going to be gamified. This will absolutely be abused if it's put into place. And there's probably going to be a higher burden on record keeping and audits in order to make sure that this doesn't get abused. So there might not really be, this could be a pretty meaningful net cost for that type of stuff to actually be put in place. They're probably going to have to levy pretty severe penalties to people who abuse this type of system. I bet you a lot of restaurants will will shift to something like an opt out system, which technically keeps it optional, but it might be, let's say that they take food prices from $10 before tip. So if I go to a restaurant, typically I pay $10 for a meal and I might pay 20%, $2 for the tip. That's an all-in $12 cost. They might say, well, actually, we're going to decrease food costs by, I don't know, 20%. So call it $8 for the meal, but then put a mandatory 50% tip on there, or default you into a 50% tip. Gets me to the same $12 spot all in as the end consumer. But then basically all of the employees' wages are tax-free. The employer would actually save 10% because they don't have to pay that payroll tax anymore on those tips they otherwise would have paid. In that type of scenario, everybody wins. But it really comes down to, how are they going to define tips? What are they going to allow on this? So plausible, but there's a lot of work. The implementation here is tricky. Same thing with overtime, right? Overtime, if you look at some of these numbers from the Tax Foundation, basically it is saying that overtime is going to have if we were to exempt overtime from income tax, it would have a meaningfully higher, like 6 or 7 times higher net decrease in tax revenue to the government if they were to exempt overtime. I have to think that that's understated, because whenever these tax projections are done, they're just taking current collections, looking at how this country operates today and saying, if nothing changes, here's what these tax proposals are going to do. The reality is people change their behaviors around the rules all the time. So, if I was a business owner and I wanted to exempt, I wanted to get my employees more money, I would pay them more overtime, or I'd figure out a way to get them to pay more overtime.